one of the big surprises I had when I was, trying to decipher a best way of working, with that cast that I've shown of the flayed figure. One of the great discoveries of painting things to look the way they look as soon as you put them down, and I mean things like an area, for example, you say top and bottom, to actually articulate the look of nature at that spot on the top of the head by value contrast, by edge and by shape. And to draw the low point, whether it's a piece of the base of the cast or whatever, so it had the look of nature there as well, with its contrast being adjusted to, it would be expressed well and then being adjusted to its to the one that's already stated, the top and bottom, or say then you do a hip or something on a figure. The big surprise, and I mean big surprise, when I did that, was to discover this enormously increased sense of the spatial, the sense of front and back, and that had never existed before in the world that I'd created by drawing outlines around objects and then noodling across them. That had never existed before. And yet, the figure itself has that content when you do the values in the order of, and you actually do the tuning in the order of effect. And so now again, so we're talking back for a second about Benson, and what he said is stop drawing to his daughter, stop drawing with the outline the way you've been taught, draw with the effects. And so, of course, the effects have to be rightly related to each other. And so a drawing with the effects actually says what drawing there is, which is what silhouetting there is, should be right in its contrast compared to other things in the picture. And before you know it, you'll have a spatial sense. Things highly contrasty and sharper edged will be nearer you, will appear to be nearer to your eye. And things with less contrast, right down to the very nth degree of lostness, will be farthest from your eye. And what an incredible thing to have seen. And all I was trying to do was was to discover how to avoid having 30 errors in the painting, or this is in the drawing, but in the drawing within a half hour, an hour of working. So again, that's a similar kind of discussion that Richard Schmidt had in one of his videos. It's a really interesting point, or his book, I guess. But it's a really interesting point. That shift was so dramatic, the sense of space that was created, that as soon as I applied it to still life or to landscape, I suddenly had, like the entire world was now mine. It was no longer about making the tree look right, the right shaped tree and all that sort of stuff. But you set up with the visual order from the very beginning, and you have the sense of space, so that when you look from your painting, what I found that when I looked from my painting to nature, all the components were there. There was a sense of space this way, not just shape stuff this way. And I should say, too, that I found that there was a necessity. You have to absolutely be disciplined to seeing like just retinally. In other words, the world is flat. So anytime you're doing anything that relates to location in space, it's just this and this, except for this odd thing that goes on, which is this space, right? So the question came up, and I think it's quite a fun one, from Agam, who he's referring to a nice, pleasant drive we had, the two of us, heading north at one point from maybe Lawrence, I forget where. And the conversation came up related to, I had that conversation about creating of space. And then he ran into the Munsell color wheel and the idea of color space and asked me, so here's the question, let me read it. It's a reduced version of it, excuse me for that, Agam. But anyway, he mentioned Munsell. He says, what is color space? How do you use the term? What's it mean on the picture plane and or in terms of color theory or composition, Agam? So here's to you, Agam. Thanks for the good question. This is a very important question, and other people have actually addressed it in ways in which they tell me I'm wrong. And so I'm very interested in what you've heard, what you've experienced. But projectiveness to the eye is a big deal. And I recommend, by the way, another one of my books, I recommend you read The Problem of Form by Adolf Hildebrand. There's a sculptor. and I think this was written around the end of the 19th century. But take a look at it if you can read. I mean, it's not the easiest reading you'll ever see, and most of what I'm talking about is sort of alluded to, almost more than mentioned, although some of it's very specific. And he does talk about painting. He's a sculptor, but he's talking about painting as well. I found a lot of people, including people like Rodin, were involved in drawing and painting, not just limited to sculpture, and actually were knowledgeable to some degree. And I can't say I've never seen a painting by Hildebrand, but it's worth a look. But this is all about space, and the way the sculptor works. He's talking about a relief, and he's talking about these levels that exist. Like when you're talking to people about picture plane, they say, "Oh, there's the foreground, the middle ground, the background." Well, that's a nice thing to say if you mean that we mean that anything is 30 feet from me is this, anything 40 feet is that, and anything on the horizon is the background. You know what I mean? So we do it that way. But he actually suggests that there's a visual phenomenon happening, and that is what I'm going to call projectivity, right? The ability of the painting to project to your eye elements in the painting to project to your eye, and some of them will project more weakly. Hence, the whole need to blur down. I'm still going to talk about color space in Munsell, but this is about space. But I want to mention something while I'm here, though, because I had a person working with me recently he said, "I'm blurring. You told me to blur, so I'm blurring, and so I'm painting a blurry picture." I mean, the only reason to blur down, you don't paint a blurry picture. I mean, who would do that? I mean, why would you do that, right? I mean, you don't see good paintings being blurry paintings, and good paintings don't come out of blur. They come out of, there's always a focus as much as there's anything else. There's lost and found in a picture. But the articulation of the look of nature with your eyes wide open is what we do, right? So don't think that it means anything. All you do is blur down. All you blur down for, though, is to see what I'm talking about, to actually get a hold of what's coming to your eye first. If you're looking at the screen, just blur down at it, and you'll see elements, perhaps the light sun on this here, whatever, and there'll be some things will just gradually all start disappearing into the background, while some of these brilliant lights will sit way in your eye. They'll still be there, right? And that's what I mean by projectivity. So that if you can follow from there, that I'm talking about deep space now, okay? Never used that word before, but I like it. But the idea of space this way, right? Not just the distance between things. Not just the illusion that because this is on the floor here and that's on the floor back there, there's a sense of space. Not that, no. This is different. But this is the sense of the third dimension that is simply contained in the visual truth, right? And it's one of the reasons, by the way, I can't understand why people paint out of their heads, because the mastery of the visual truth, I mean, literally the mastery of color and color relations, edge relations, size relations, form, movement of value, color, chroma, everything related. They all do things that are this. They're spatial. And Benson knew it like crazy, right? We're talking Frank Benson, the Boston School. That conversation comes from there. But so when I talk about space, I'm not going to argue with, let me go back to Munsell. The Munsell question, when I finally looked it up, I'd never heard that before, but he talks about color space. Somebody has created this diagram using the colors as it were like on a distorted ball. And the color space that they're talking about literally is just how colors relate to each other and how they can be related to each other for the purposes of color mixing. That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, not even a little bit, okay? So don't confuse the two. I mean, the color theory is not in the same class as what color does when you start living in this world, I mean, by the way, they probably will talk about things like the relative when a highly intense color versus a less intense color, that they'll have the whatever they call those, the light wave will be a higher speed or something like that. I don't know those words, but the science of that. But so they may talk about that, and that's a reality, right? And they'll actually tell you, and this is one of those places where I had a former student of mine actually claim that there was no such thing as color forwardness, that blues don't necessarily recede and other colors come forward, and like oranges come to your eye. But I think you'd find Munsell disputing that, but I would dispute it based on my experience. But At the very minimum, though, if you take two blues, the same blue, but you make one of them considerably more intense than the other, start eliminating the dark, leave one in the dark zone there, make one more intense, literally meaning more rich color. It will hit your eye first. And that's a visual phenomenal fact, right? And if it's true, then all sorts of things are contributing to this sense of space, right? Now, we know perspective. If you put a person here that's this big and you put another person here that's this big, we have a sense of space. We have a sense of distance because we know perspective. And we're used to these things, creating the feeling of 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever, depending on where you're standing. But frequently it's lost in the methods that are being employed. It's lost that there are many things contributing to the sense of space. Which brings us all the way back to what we're doing, say, as a teacher or as a student, shall we say, of the visual, right? I should say of the ocular, and I will talk. That word is a word from this guy Meldrum that I've just been introduced to by Jazz. Thanks, Jazz. Who's a guy he's a young guy really doing, I take it he's a young guy, really doing the right kind of digging. It's really quite impressive. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody with a more, with more intensity and sort of focus on the right thing. So I do very much appreciate that. But this gentleman is an Australian painter, studied in Paris, and wrote. He lived the same time roughly as Paxton, and he wrote about this. He called it something called the science of appearances. So I'll talk about that more specifically as I finish looking at what he said. But his book sounds like I haven't run into anything that I haven't told students, because the relation to the visual is so huge. I mean, when you're in our world, I mean, it's so complete, because once you're in this world, these are the elements of it, right? So the person who's a storytelling picture, an illustrator, for example, he doesn't put this enormous amount of energy and study into the purely abstract elements of the visual, right? And but the guy who has introduced himself to the visual and literally is studying up nature and just listening and has that naive eye, this color is that color, and that whole thing about that search for the relationships between things that make up the visual, the ensemble, that guy is going to find himself in music land. He's going to find himself hearing abstract poetry, the rhymes and rhythms that are akin to sound. So that's a big reason why I would encourage that. But there's also this enormous spatial thing that goes on, and you can actually, looking at your painting, you can actually begin to understand why the painting is beautiful this way, right? And not just why this color to this color to that color, or whatever, is fun, or why this color setting off that color is beautiful, Or in the world of pattern, why this shape looks nice against that shape, and making an interesting set of, patterns and shapes. So, but that was a pretty long way around, Agam. I'm actually saying that when I talk about high contrast, I'm talking about something that will come to your eye before low contrast. When I talk about sharp edges, all other things being equal, I'm talking about something that will come to your eye faster. In other words, it'll be there at the front of your picture plane stuff in the purely ocular sense, right? Before other things. If I talk about intensity, that'll be to your eye first, which means, by the way, that anything that's less intense will be back, will be recessive, right? It'll be back, I should say back. But that sense of space is being created by every little thing you do. If you make as I said, you make two people, one bigger and the other one smaller, you get a sense of space. In other words, that's perspective science, if you want to call it that, yeah? So, so it's just there. And if you're looking and you wonder if your color notes are right, notice whether it produces the right sense of space that you see also in nature, right? And it just got this wonderful, it's just all there. It's also rich. I always laugh when I talk to students. I mean, I was laughed at myself because I know why this is, but I would say, the crib sheet's right there. How can you be missing by so much? I mean, the crib sheet. So here's nature. You're painting this thing. How come your painting ain't doing that? I mean, you got all the answers to the test, But that's just the sort of the stuff you do to torment yourself, I guess you might say. But to sort of wake people up a little bit, to help remind them that how would you be handling this? Because what we're primarily doing at the beginning is just studying nature, meaning literally trying to transfer onto canvas the content of the visual world to the point where it feels like, whoa, that is that. But for all you sightseers, just get over it. You can keep struggling down your paths. You'll never get there from there, okay? Because it's a relational phenomena, right? So that's all I wanted to say. I don't know if that's clear enough for you, Agam, but I'll stop at that this time. And if you want to do more, let's see if there's anything else as I always do, that I might have missed. So I've talked to you enough about the picture plane. Yeah, color theory. I'm barely interested in color theory. You know what I mean? I mean, there are reasons. Everything. I mean, everything's got theory. If you study color, if you study color relations, if you just study dressing yourself and getting the right things to go together, you'll learn color theory. That should evolve, right? So color theory is your summing up of what you've learned by your experiences, right? And so you can listen to somebody else's color theory all day, but you don't want to paint from that. You want to paint from your own. You want to do your own studies from nature, and that's why the source, always no matter who you're talking to, the source is nature, right? So study it up, but do it ocularly. Do it just in color relations value. Do it as an honest and naive eye. Listen to Monet. And I'm not telling you to become a sloppy draftsman. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Draftsmanship the articulation of shape and all that sort of stuff is just as much part of the ocular world as anything else. So, and the authority with which you do it is part of the measure of how good you are. You can't just go around doing blobs and tell me you're, as a student, at least a student of nature, tell me that you're doing what you see in front of you. Everything's soft-edged, No, they're sharp edges. They're differences and edges. And actually, Monet talks about how he would have done some things differently, given what he knew by the end of his life. But listen, the guy did what we needed, and we are enormously grateful. Thank you, Mr. Monet. And thank you all for being here today. Comment, like, share. Please do. Subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.